Now, this was in December 1981, and I was at 7,000 meters in the Himalayas in December, in winter, in northern Nepal, on a mountain called Makalu, and a small British expedition, we were trying to climb it. We didn't actually do it, but we got quite high. And I was abducted out of my tent in the middle of the night in December. It's not a usual abduction when they come and, you know, to like an apartment in Amsterdam, which is all nice and easy. And
I don't think any abduction is usual.
No, sure. But, but this was quite unusual because I was floated out of my tent. The temperature was probably, it was the middle of the night in December in the Himalayas at 7,000 meters. The temperature must have been about minus 40 Celsius, maybe colder. And when I recalled this happening, because as with almost all abductions, you don't remember what, when I recalled it happening, the moment that I remember sitting in my tent, now I was lying in my tent with three of us like sardines. There's my friend here and my friend here, and I was like that, and I was all zipped up in my sleeping bag. And then the zip of the tent opened, and this little grey being poked his head through and looked at me, you know, like that. That was the single most frightening moment of my whole life when I remembered that moment. I nearly jumped right out of my chair and went through the ceiling when I remembered that. It's like, oh my God, you know. And then, I mean, it was real. You see, because you don't get shocked by an imaginary memory. You get shocked by a real memory.
Yeah.
And now, this is all very complicated because I don't believe that was a malicious abduction. I believe that something was going on which was in some way a preparation for what we're doing now.
Okay.
And it probably was all with my agreement at a higher level, because I'm very comfortable with what's happening now. At the time I didn't understand the experience, but I wasn't, it's like, I don't know what's going on, what's going on, what's going on. But I wasn't, it wasn't something that I wished hadn't happened. I just wanted to know why it was going on.
Yeah.
Now, so very complicated. At that time, one of the people I was with was a mountaineer friend of mine he was a small guy. He was, I can only speak in terms of English feet. He was about 5'2". What's that, about 1 meter 60? Somebody?
Something,
Tell me?
yeah.
Something like that. He was quite a small guy. He had had an ET experience at that time as well. In the same expedition, the previous day, he only told me about this years later, when he was going down the mountain from the same place, he fell into a crevasse, which is not a good idea if you're a mountaineer on your own. Usually that's the end of the game, that's it. And the way that he told the story was, next thing I knew, I was out of the crevasse. He'd been teleported out of the crevasse, and there were two beings there who talked with him for a long time. And when he was telling me this story, I was becoming really freaked out, because I knew that just the day after that I had my abduction experience, and we were comparing our experiences. Now, round about that time as well, I had a girlfriend who was also very small. She was even smaller. She was about 1 meter 50? No, that can't be right. She was about 4'10". What would that be?
That's smaller. I mean, 1 meter 40 or something.
That's pretty small.
Yeah.
That's pretty small.
Yeah.
She had a lot of very interesting psychic power. She was a very unusual person. And she would always tell me, and this always kind of slightly freaked me out, because I really enjoyed being with her. She said, "You are very special." She said, "We won't always be together, but I will always love you." And I mean, I don't know how to, you know, how on earth do you respond to something like that, you know? And she would, you know, she would know when things were going to happen, and she'd make the phone ring, and she'd be totally telepathic, and once or twice I'd be really upset, and she'd just look into my eyes, and then the upset would disappear. All this kind of weird stuff. But then humans can do that too. And one night we were in bed, just cuddling in bed. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and she had her back to the door. And I was looking over her shoulder towards the door, and then this being appeared in the door. Okay. It wasn't like a classical grey being, but it looked very much like what Arthur Newman describes as a childlike being, with quite big eyes, but not the kind of weird eyes, you know, kind of large eyes and quite a round head, but also quite small.
Also unlike the being you saw in your tent.
Not like the being I saw in my tent. The being I saw in my tent was more of the classical grey.
Okay.
You see, okay. So I saw this being in my room, sitting right there, and sorry, standing right there in the doorway, and I froze and didn't say anything because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And Angie, which was her name, she had her back to the door, and I didn't say a word. And she said, "Don't worry. It's all right. I've seen them all my life. You've got nothing to be afraid of." And this being was behind her, and I hadn't said anything. And then this whole thing completely freaked me out. And then I spoke to my other friend about this, Dave. Now, he was the mountaineer guy. And he said, "I know that happened."
Oh?
And I said, "How do you know?"
Yeah.
He said, "I just know." You know. And then that freaked me out even more. And then I went back to Angie and I told her about what the conversation I'd had with Dave. And it was round about that time that he told me about the incident in the Himalayas. This is a very convoluted story. And Angie said, looking into, she said, "I haven't talked with Dave about any of this, but looking into Dave's head is like looking into my own." She said. And these two small beings with these strange abilities. And Angie would say things to me, like an example was what I mentioned before. She'd say, "You're very special, you know, but and we won't always be together, but I'll always love you." And one day we were sitting having breakfast, you know, just like with the croissants and the coffee, and you know, and she just looked at me and she said, "The earth is a very beautiful place, and it won't always be this way." And I've never forgotten those words. It sends a chill down my spine every time I think about it, you know. And I said, "What did he say?" You know. And she just almost ignored the fact that she'd said it, and then she just carried on eating breakfast. And there were a number of other things which she said which I can't remember. But round about this time, I found myself thinking, this person is not a normal person. Absolutely not a normal person.
No, something to say like
and
that. You have
there's
to come
something
from a place
really,
of knowing.
Yeah, there's something really strange going on here. And I mean, I could spend 2 hours talking about all the experiences I had here. But something which was really remarkable happened. Actually, there are two more parts of this story, because I don't want to take this story away from you, because you've got a lot of stories of your own here. But two things, other things happened that are worth recording. The second one of which I'll say at the end, I never tell anybody, because it's so bizarre. She attended a personal development workshop, where you get in touch with some of the thoughts and beliefs that you have that limit yourself and all of that kind of stuff. And she was very small. She was the eldest of three sisters, but she was the smallest. And she'd always make kind of jokes about herself. She said, "You know, I'm not really small. People just think I'm small," and you know, and so on and so forth. And in this workshop, she realized that she had an investment in being small. In other words, because she was small, she got to be the center of attention, she got to make jokes about herself, she got to, you know, it's what psychologists and therapists call a payoff. And when she realized that, she grew. And she was 26 years old, and she grew, I've got to do the calculation again, she grew 2.5 inches, which is about 8 centimeters, in 2 weeks. Wow. And I have a feeling that it was actually overnight, but I can't prove that. It was definitely within 2 weeks. And what happened was like something out of a comedy film. I hadn't seen her for a little while because she'd been doing this workshop and stuff. And I went to give her a hug and I said, look, there's no need for you to stand on your toes. And she said, I'm not standing on your toes. You know. And I said, yes, you are, because you're taller. And she said, I'm not taller. What do you mean? And she said, look. And I looked and she was standing flat on her feet and she was taller. And then we ran around the house, seeing if she could fit into her clothes and if she could fit into her shoes, and her shoes wouldn't fit.
So she wasn't aware of it herself?
And no.
Okay.
For some reason, she had no idea, which is why I think this happened really suddenly. I have a feeling this happened really suddenly. Now, this is biologically impossible, you know, but then you start talking with very, very high strangeness. Yeah. But she definitely grew. We measured her. It was midnight, and I went around phoning up all my friends saying, Angie's grown, Angie's grown. And they said, what? What are you talking, what? You know, it was like something out of a very, very bad comedy movie. So but that happened, she did grow. And I got really excited. I said, right, you're going to keep on growing, and you're going to be really tall. But she freaked out about this whole thing because there's this human aspect of her, and then she stopped. Oh, right. She stopped growing. It was remarkable. And that really happened. And the other thing that happened was the culmination of what I had earlier described as she was saying, you know, we're not always going to be together, but I'll always love you. And one day, she just left. She said, okay, I'm going now. She said, my purpose in your life is complete. And that's enough to freak you out when you really love someone. You spend 3 years with them. She said, my purpose in your life is complete. Now I'm going. You know, I'll always love you. Bye-bye. And I said, well, what's the problem? She said, there's no problem. She said, my purpose in your life is complete. This is why I think this whole thing, whatever it was, connected with this abduction experience and my other friend Dave, it was some kind of a setup for this. And I was hugely upset by this, as you might imagine. I couldn't cope with this at all. I had no way of coping with this. Yeah. And it was Christmas time. We'd bought tickets for a skiing holiday. And it's like, well, what about my skiing holiday? And she said, well, just give the ticket to someone else. You know, it's okay. And I had some people staying in my house, and I was so upset. I stayed in bed for 3 days. I couldn't handle it. I went into a personal black hole. This was all back in, this was 20 years ago. This was in 1986. And on the third day, and this is what I don't tell anyone, it's the most extraordinary story. On the third day, another being appeared in my room, like the first one. And you know that story, the scene in E.T., the movie E.T., you know, when he has his glowing red finger and he heals Elliot, because Elliot is upset, you know, the little boy who he befriends. This is what happened to me. This being appeared in my room, and I've been sitting there in bed, unable to move, unable to function, couldn't handle this. This was not intended. The being came up to me with his finger, touched me in the middle of the chest, and then I was fine. All the upset went away, and I went downstairs, and the whole thing was handled for me. Wow. It was a remarkable story. Yeah. I don't tell people that, because there's no way anyone can believe it. I don't believe it myself, you know, but that's what happened. And it's a very important story for one reason, that despite its unbelievability, what it shows me is that these beings who are behind that abduction and that experience and that program, whatever it was, they actually have compassion. They really do have compassion. Yeah. This wasn't a mindless programmed biological robot. This was somebody who came in because it wasn't part of the plan that I should be so upset that I couldn't function. So they had to fix that, and they fixed it, and it was a compassionate act.
And you could really feel it like that.
It just disappeared. Yeah. Everything disappeared. Like somebody turned a switch and I wasn't upset anymore. I wasn't upset because something was added on like a mask. The upset was handled because they took the upset away, which is the basis of all effective therapeutic programs, is the charge that's associated with an incident. You remove that charge and then you're back to normal again. Wow. It's the charge that makes people upset, so they lifted the charge off and then it had gone.